that was secondary to sending her daughter to secondary school. The lady in South Rivers, and she bohag.
I want to take you to the Caribbean civilization, a concept, a theme that you have written on extensively and continue, but I think this definition that you have given here, I prefer this one, or probably this tastes better in my mouth now, than the rhythm of Africa?
Yeah, the songs of the indigenous people, the Kalinago and the Garifuna, the rhythm of Africa, the melody of Europe, the chords of Asia, and the homegrown lyrics of the Caribbean.
People like me and you.
Yes, yes.
In this book, you say, our region's evolution from a culturally plural social arrangement to a relatively integrated Creole society composed almost entirely of migrant peoples from 3 continents, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and occupying a particular geographic space, has made a unique civilization. I think that this is so deep, so steep in accuracy.
Either in that paragraph, or a preceding one or a subsequent one, I conjoin to the indigenous people, because we have not. Well, when I read this book, I will see what the sister writes about, the one about the unconquerable spirit.
Yeah, but the Kalinago and Garifuna and in Dominica and so on. Yeah,
the Kalinago and the Garifuna occupy a very special place in our historiography. And they have set the standard even before the establishment of the enslavement of African bodies by colonialism, by British colonialism in our parts. The Kalinago and the Garifuna, by virtue of their resistance and indomitable spirit, they have informed a particular trajectory of resistance and creative construction in our society, which are yet to be fully utilized. Now, the Kalinago and the Garifuna, especially those who are thoughtful among them, they have a particular view of life and living and the evolution through their families. Persons in the cabinet would, many times, I will just say to Gomery, sitting to my right hand at the cabinet, I said, Chief, what do you think about this? They bring a perspective to you from a constellation of experiences which are handed down from generation to generation. And hear me this, 1795 may appear, and it is a long time ago, but in the sweep of history, it's just the other day, you know. Once upon a time, not on the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, a French intellectual was asked by an American journalist, French Revolution, and the French intellectual said, it is too early to tell. So, you have to give deep thought to all of these things. And of course, because everybody is living and working and hustling, they don't give deep thought to many things. And unless we do so, we're not going to be able to build some of the problems that we have on an ongoing basis in our Caribbean. That's why I love when the when the suggestion came that we call this session Ideas That Shape a Nation, because the source of the ideas are before you. Karl Marx, writing in the middle of the 19th century. Perhaps I'm the only leader in the Caribbean who will quote Karl Marx, because people afraid his name like how John be afraid holy
That's
water.
not true. But my students in history, they all have to do Marx.
Well,
So just last week, they were doing Marx.
very
Because
important.
Marx's history, in fact, in the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we do imply a Marxian approach, because Marx's history has what we call history from below. When we speak about the Garifuna and Kalinago, we're speaking about history from the below. In fact, this chapter, the first chapter, is history from the below, because the Prime Minister is writing it as a little boy in a rural village, and how he navigates life between the community, and then he gets a chance to go to the wider world, and at the same time makes connections that last a lifetime and are still operative. In fact, that lecture in Dominica,
Rosie Douglas.
Rosie,
Yeah.
you gave me a lot of information to finish a paper I was writing. Kisara?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Scott. Now, Prime Minister, if I may take you to page 40, which is in chapter 2, where you delivered an address on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. And I would share a little story. When I was at the University of the West Indies, Cavale campus, we were doing Caribbean integration law. And I made the proposition that the OECS has been able to accomplish many things when compared to CARICOM. And I remember that some of my peers from the larger islands, they scoffed and laughed at the idea until my lecturer vindicated what I was saying. And he said, yes, the OECS has been able to accomplish a lot as it relates to integration. But I will take you to page 40, again, the penultimate paragraph. So let's start from setting the context. And one of the things I love about the writing of the Prime Minister is that he always sets the context, so you understand where we are coming from and where we are now. You said, if the truth be told, the earlier years of the OECS and its member states were neither idyllic nor heavenly. Our countries were poorer than now, were less educated than now, were technologically less advanced than now, were less politically sophisticated than now, and we were less democratic then than now. And then on the other page, page 41, you noted that the founding fathers of the OECS rightly saw wisdom in consolidating an inner concentric circle of the regional integration movement, but with points of relevance and contact to the wider CARICOM.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kisal.
Well, what I was going to ask is, compare the OECS then, in the beginning, when it was formed, and now. How far have we come as a sub-regional organization?
We have come quite far. The revised treaty, the Treaty of Bastille establishing the OECS was signed in 1981. In 2010, we signed the revised Treaty of Bastille establishing an economic union. And one of the critical differences now than then is that under the revised Treaty of Bastille, establishing an economic union in 2010, is the issue of full, free movement of labor. Since then, since 2010, that framework was established. Just the administrative decisions were taking place afterwards. If Vincentians can leave here and go to Grenada with just a picture ID and come off the plane, come off the boat, and go to the supermarket, in fact, go to the same airport and ask them, you have a job? I come from St. Vincent, look and walk. And you could get a job there. Same thing, a Grenadian coming here. Of course, the challenge for us was this, and this is where Barbados is so important now. It's not easy to get flights to go directly to Grenada. You have some, but you have more flights going Barbados, St. Vincent, Barbados, Barbados, Grenada. When you reach Barbados, you can't use a picture ID. You have to have a passport. So you could use your voting card to go to Grenada. But once you're passing through Barbados, they wouldn't let you in unless you have a passport. And the problems then, because you would have only been allowed 6 months under the CARICOM rules. Now you can go there and work in the same manner if you go Grenada, St. Lucia, wherever. So I think that's one very big difference. Also, the institutions, there are other institutions which have been created since 2001, which are bodies within the OECS. You take, for instance, ECTEL. ECTEL was created in the early 21st century under a law which was passed in 2001. ECTEL and as the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority and the National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. They just up the road here by Murray Village, by Murray Road, you know. The word is so the Murray Road does humbug my mouth because of the fella Murray. But it's just up the road there, because there was a monopoly at the time before cable and wireless, and that legislation liberalized telecommunications. That's how Digicel came in. Sprint came in for a short while, but the market couldn't hold all three. Then the Supreme Court was there from the West Indies Associated States, which was the precursor to the OECS, the original OECS. The central bank was also established, and that of course plays a very critical role, and the central bank has extended its regulatory functions and oversight of banking institutions and other financial institutions too, commercial banking institutions. So what has happened? The real world has made the OECS institutional arrangements change. And if you read carefully the revised Treaty of Bastille, and I was very much involved in helping with that. The two draftspersons for that 2010 revised Treaty of Bastille is Professor Carnegie, a Jamaican who's a distinguished lecturer in constitutional law. He has written a lot of stuff. He went to Oxford.
He was at Keyville.
Yes,
and his
he
wife
went to UWI, then he went to Oxford.
Worked in the library.
Yes. His wife worked in the library.
Yes.
And Reggie Amor, who is a senior counsel in Trinidad, former Attorney General, but born in Dominica from the Amor family. So he has, I think he's appointed a temporary judge in the Court of Appeal since he demitted office as Attorney General, since Rowley lost the election. or since Rowley demitted as Prime Minister before Stuart Young was there for the month. The treaty has a very interesting way it balances the power of the OECS authority, which is the meeting of the heads of government. There's a chief executive officer in the OECS, and the constitutional arrangements of the individual countries. So what you have, we make decisions together at the OECS authority, and then we come to the parliament and we pass the common laws, but the decisions emanate really from the OECS authority. So those are some, there are others too, but, and that's why I decided to write the essay on reading, how to read the revised,
which is chapter
the revised treaty of
chapter 4
or 5, the revised treaty of Bastille. That's why I thought it was important, precisely for the question you raised, to try and answer that in that chapter.
So we are still on this book, Regional Integration in our Caribbean, and you mentioned Charles Gideon Murray. I'll tell you something. There was a cricket game here in 1912. The Early Car Cup was at Victoria Park.
Yes.
St. Vincent was playing Grenada, and Richard Oliver was batting. Richard Oliver is the brother of Charlie Oliver, and you've spoken many times about the Oliver brother. So there was an appeal for LBW, and the umpire, who was from St. Lucia, gave him out. And the whole park was in a riot. In fact, fellas were outside Bentinck Square waiting on them. And they had to ship them out in the middle of the night back to Grenada. And Charles Gideon Murray, who was the governor, not the governor, the administrator at the time, he was fashioning an idea to form all integration. In fact, he wrote a book about forming a West Indies Federation. So it is so funny that you mentioned Gideon Murray, because we have moved from the Gideon Murray concept of a unitary Caribbean unitary state to our, what you call in the book, you call it a minimalist approach. Kisal, you know what page that is?
I can't remember the page, but I do remember.
Yeah, minimalist approach versus a
maximalist.
Right.
The unitary state.
Yeah, I want you to expand on that, because I find that the conceptualizing and the theorizing here is on point.
Yes.
You didn't use the term pragmatic. You didn't, because you could have used pragmatic, but I think that minimalist versus maximalist gives you the contrast that will really capture the imagination of the reader.
I think there are two things you have to bear in mind when you're looking at integration of these islands. In addition to the point I made about the nature of integrating islands. By the way, the problem of integrating islands with the inward look and the outward gaze and the tension. That's what happened, you know, in Europe with Britain. Britain as an island, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, which is part of it, was part of the island, what you may call the Irish island. They went kicking and screaming to the European Union, you know. And when difficulties came, it was fairly easy for Boris Johnson to persuade the British public to get out. And particularly in the British case, where they had a history of empire, and Boris was using this emotion to have them look forward to the past, but the past had already gone. Just like some people in St. Vincent and Grenadines looking forward to the past. You know, if you're looking forward to the past, the future is behind you, therefore you can't own the future.
The past is our fathers. The past is our fathers'
mischief.
And the future,
we mustn't desecrate it. No. So that's the islandness is an important observation which needs to be made and factored in. But the integration process has predisposing and inducing factors. There are things which predispose us towards union, close geographic closeness, historical and cultural connections, and so forth. But those alone would not be able to make an integration movement. Shared experiences must metamorphose into shared institutional expressions. And this is where you come now to the second set of factors, those which induce you the economic necessity for having the central bank. If we didn't have the central bank, just think about it. A region, a sub-region of 650,000 persons, the OECS countries, and it includes, of course, Montserrat and Anguilla, the 6 independent countries, and Montserrat and Anguilla. Other than the Canadian and the European, and the Canadian and the American dollar in this hemisphere, the strongest currency is the OECS dollar, the EC dollar. Because every single dollar which we have in circulation is backed by foreign currency. We figured that out early and not to play developmental games with our central bank. St. Vincent couldn't have its own currency. But
you mean not to print money? Because some people might not understand when you say development. Not to print money, not to devalue.
Not to print money in excess of what you have in real hard currency to back yours. Because the law says, and the usual benchmark is that your currency, you can't have it backed by less than 60% of solid foreign currency, your own currency. But we have learned that you have to try to keep it 1-to-1. As soon as, if you get down in any currency in these small countries in the Caribbean, below 80% back in with hard currency or gold, you have a black market and you're going to have a run on your dollar. That's what happened in Trinidad, They allow it to float within a particular margin and it's not fixed. And they have despite all the money, it's easier to get foreign exchange in St. Vincent and Grenadines than to get in Trinidad, It has to do with the kind of monetary system we have. So, is what now is going to induce you. We have our experiences, but shared experiences have to metamorphose into shared institutional expressions for the integration movement to be meaningful. Thus, the currency, the central bank, which is vital. The Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. Anytime you meet anybody who doesn't believe in these institutions, question them seriously. When Chastana came to office, in St. Lucia, because ECA had stopped him from flying on a plane and doing something and to try to bring a plane in St. Lucia when he was in Stevenson King government a little earlier. He thought that he had the authority to regulate civil aviation in St. Lucia. And ECA stopped him. And he had it in a crack against ECA from that. That's why I don't respect Chastany as any serious leader. I don't mind. I've said it more than once. He's the worst leader by far that I ever met in the 25 years since I've been in government. They have some also, but he's the worst one for this reason. Chastany went and asked Trinidad if Trinidad would deal with his civil aviation. They told him, yes, we can do it, but this is what it's going to cost you. So he had to run. The man had the gall to inquire of the Americans if the Federal Aviation Agency, they asked him if he's crazy. You wanted America to run the civil aviation. These are serious, so that a lot of things don't happen and people don't talk about them out there. But regional integration is so vital to us. We can't survive without it. We can't. So there's ECTEL. You think we could regulate this the telephone business information technology if we don't have ECTEL? You think we can deal with civil aviation? You think in a wider Caribbean and CARICOM, you think we can deal with disaster preparedness without without CDMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or to deal with public health? You think we could have dealt with COVID without the agency advising us, with Joyce St. John, Dr. Joyce St. John heading it, and so on and so forth? So I give those as examples. And one of the problems we have is that we are not funding these institutions as well as we should. It's still a voluntary financing, where we put the obligation on the Director General of Finance and Planning and the Accountant General to make the payments which are budgeted for. All these good governance arrangements, you see we're doing them. We talk about them, but maybe naturally you're so concerned about getting up in the morning, you know, taking care of the children, getting ready, fix the thing, you have to iron clothes, you don't have as much time to think about some of these things. But all these things are happening in your name, for your benefit. And one of the reasons why I wrote this book is I felt that leaders...
You mean regional integration?
Regional integration.
In our
Caribbean.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I wrote it is put it together, put the essays and the additional stuff for this, is not a subject which people think of day to day. And I wanted, as the longest serving Prime Minister, to put something down. And I put it down before we have a democratic contest. So that when one side is talking about digging metaphorically and literally pit toilet, I talking about this. And I talking about going to the first world.
All right, so we go to the second book, Labor is Working for All. It says an invaluable compendium of ULP policies and programs.